On Tuesday, November 4th, 2014, a 4chan user posted a disturbing photo, along with an ominous message. Turns out it's way harder to strangle someone to death than it looks in the movies. 4chan, being 4chan, didn't take this photo seriously, but the poster kept posting different angles of this same disturbing image. It was a naked woman lying on a bed, clearly dead, with ligature markings around her neck. He then said, check the news for Port Orchard, Washington in a few hours. Her son will be home from school soon. He'll find her, then call the cops. I just wanted to share the pics before they find me. I bought a BB gun that looks realistic enough. When they come, I'll pull it, and it will be suicide by cop. I understand the doubts. Just check the fucking news. I have to lose my phone now. Hey humans, it's Hannah. Welcome back to the channel. Today we are covering the very bizarre murder of Amber Lynn Coplin. This is often referred to as the 4chan murder because Amber's murderer posted pictures of her body after he killed her online for the whole world to see. I do know that some people have covered this case in the past. It has been kind of well known on the dark corners of the internet. However, I found that there was no videos that really deep dived it and didn't go into the details. And there's quite a few details in this case. This video is already going to be long and I don't even have quite all the details. There's so much other stuff in this case that just isn't like directly relevant to the story. This video probably could be 4 hours long if we went into all that. So I have a feeling it's still going to be about an hour at least just to cover what we're covering today. So like I said, I wanted to deep dive a case that usually the videos about it are only like 10 minutes long. This video is supported by a sponsorship, so we are going to roll to the ad and then I will be right back with you guys. This video is sponsored by Factor. You guys know by now that I really hate cooking. I can do basic cooking sometimes, but I am not a cook every day type at all. In fact, I was just telling my mom the other day about how much I've been struggling to feed myself lately, and that in turn has been resulting in a lot of takeout, let me tell you. So Factor has been a huge help where I don't have to think about what I'm going to eat. I don't have to prepare anything, clean up anything. I just pick which meal I want, heat it for 2 minutes in the microwave, and I have this amazing, delicious meal. Here I'm eating their taco bowl. It is so good. It comes with this herb cream stuff. The corn was really sweet. The chicken was perfectly seasoned and came out of the microwave moist and tender. Factor's fresh, never frozen meals are a great alternative to takeout. Factor is less expensive than takeout anyway, and Factor is not only dietitian approved, but all the meals are crafted by real chefs. The plans are also extremely flexible. You can get as many or as few meals as you need every week. Choose from 6 to 18 meals. You can also pause or reschedule any deliveries if you're going to be out of town or you want a week off. Head to factor75.com or click the link below and use code HannahTheHorrible50 to get 50% off your first Factor box and free wellness shots for life. 2 free wellness shots from 3 available flavors for every order while you are an active subscriber. That's factor75.com and use code HannahTheHorrible50. So we are going to start out with the victim of this case, Amber Lynn Coplin. Amber was born on May 30th, 1984, and she lived in Port Orchard, Washington. I also can relate to this case on several levels. The first one being that this entire case takes place in Washington State, where I live. So this case hits a little bit closer to home, knowing that this guy is currently in Kitsap County, jailed. Amber was only 30 years old when she was murdered. She also grew up with a huge family. She apparently had like 2 sisters and 6 brothers. One of her brothers, though, Jerry, had already passed away, though, so she technically only had 5 brothers when she passed away. So it's really no surprise that Amber wanted a big family as well. However, she started her family a little bit earlier than planned. She actually ended up getting pregnant and had her first baby at only 16 years old. But she married a man named Paul Copland, who is, as far as I understand, the father of her first son and would also father 3 more sons with her. So Amber had a total of 4 biological sons, and then Paul also had 1 other son from a different relationship. So the 2 together, because from what I've heard about Amber, she treated Paul's biological son as one of her own. So the 2 had 5 sons together. They were all ranged from like age, 13, 14 from to 5 years old. And they were both only 30. Like they had their hands full. But what's really interesting about Amber is that according to loved ones, even though she got pregnant at such a young age and she was a teen mom, apparently this actually how a lot of teen moms tend to not be the best moms, they're more likely to not be the best moms simply because they are not ready because they're still children themselves, right? But I guess Amber was the opposite of the norm. She stepped up right away. It flipped a switch in her and she wanted to be a responsible parent. She seemed to really understand the responsibility that having a child was going to be. So like I said, the 2 had 5 sons. I'm not going to name the sons' names just because they're children in this case. They're not relevant that much to the case except for her oldest son, who we're just going to refer to as BC, his initials, just to protect his identity. The names are out there. It's not like it's, not public information. It just feels like if they don't have to explain it, if it's not important to the story, I'm just going to leave the kids' identities and pictures out of this. So the only son that you really need to know is who we're going to refer to as BC. So Paul and Amber got married really young, and as it often works out, they did not end up staying together. Eventually, they separated. They never got divorced. In fact, Amber was still married legally to Paul when she was murdered, but the 2 did still co-parent together. They seemed to still be very devoted to making sure that the kids were not affected by all this. So Amber and Paul were married, 5 sons. They have been estranged though, but they are still co-parenting. BC, Amber's 13-year-old son, who I believe was the oldest, he was living with Amber in her apartment. And then his dad, Paul, had the other 4 sons at his place. I do believe that they spent all time together and the kids went back and forth and stuff, but that was the living arrangement. I don't know exactly why this living arrangement was the way it was. I can only imagine it had something to do with their jobs or schedules or something like that. I don't think, like I said, there was no beef as far as I know from my research, that it was an amicable breakup. And they were working together to keep the kids on a good path.
A good mom. She's a loving wife, a wonderful sister. You name it, anything, the good words, they're all there.
Amber, we're going to talk about this, but Amber has had some rough times as well. And she was just starting to finally get her life on track, though. She had a really good job processing claims information at State Farm. And she had a GED, but she also was currently in school for her associate's degree in insurance. So she was hoping that this associate's degree, once she completed it, would help her move up at State Farm so that she wouldn't just be processing claims information, but she would get a better paying job at State Farm if she got this degree and, stuck it out and gained seniority. In her spare time, though, this woman was so busy. She also volunteered for the Boy Scouts of America as her sons were in Cub Scouts. So now we do need to talk about, because it's important to the story, we do need to talk about the affliction of alcoholism in this story. This story is very much surrounded by alcoholism. And Amber definitely had an addiction. She definitely struggled with her alcohol addiction. And I just want to stress that, again, from all of the articles and everything anyone said about her, it again did not get in her way of being a good mom. I'm sure she wasn't perfect, but she was not doing anything bad to the children. She just had this like separate life, this separate addiction that was really behind closed doors she was really struggling with. But again, as far as I read, she was still a really good mom. But she was also said to just be known to be the person to put a positive spin on any situation. She was willing to help any of her family or friends, like she put them before her. Her mom also described her as stubborn and headstrong, that like once she had made her mind up about something, there was no changing it. And that's also where this story, I related very much to this story, and this story really hit home for me because I am exactly like that. I think Amber and I might have been very similar in a lot of ways, because if you asked my mom, that is exactly what she would say about me, is that the second I make a decision about something, like it's like, I'm pretty sure that's why I have a YouTube channel that became successful, because I decided that I was going to be a YouTuber. Like that's just what I decided one day, and I was going to make it happen, you know? So I'm just very much like that as well. And so I just relate to Amber quite a bit. I just thought that was a funny piece. And then lastly, they would also say that Amber was the type of person to just like bust into song randomly, especially in the car. Sometimes she'd get her sons even to sing with her. And I just love people like that. I just think people like that are just fun to be around and just give you like, you know, good vibes. Okay, there's no skirting around this though. We do have to address the fact that she was an alcoholic. Now, I want to be very clear. This is my opinion on alcoholism. And I mean, it's probably not an opinion. It's probably based in fact as well. But there's a stereotype of addicts and alcoholics, right? I think the stereotype is typically Frank from Shameless, like the dad from Shameless, you know, abusive, volatile, angry, will do literally anything to get their drugs and alcohol, don't care who they hurt in the process or what they have to do to get it. They're just like mean, selfish, right? And while this of course is true for some alcoholics, I just want to be clear that this was not Amber, and this is often not a lot of alcoholics. Many people, it's like depression. It's a really invisible illness very often. You have met people and probably had people that you were close with who were suffering with alcoholism behind the scenes, and you would never know. I had a coworker who passed away at 32 years old from his alcoholism, and all of us were shocked. None of us understood why or how he passed away until we went to his service and learned about what he was dealing with behind the scenes. And nothing made sense until then. Like, he was the nicest, most interesting, like really cool, chill guy you never would have known. He was so sweet. And of course, many of us have also known those alcoholics that they struggle with alcoholism, but they are not mean when they get drunk. In fact, they're super nice. Like, they get even more friendly and jovial when they're drinking. I just want to make that very clear here, and that will become clear because the juxtaposition between Amber's alcoholism and David's alcoholism is like a pretty significant part of this case, actually. And I just want to be very clear that just because you suffer from alcoholism or addiction does not make you some horrible person. You're responsible for your actions, but that goes to show that it doesn't mean your actions are going to be bad. Amber was her. I think she was a good mom. She loved those kids more than anything in the entire world, and she happened to be an alcoholic on top of that. Let's move on to David Kallick. David, oh my God. I have so many feelings on David. Speaking of stereotypical alcoholics like Frank from Shameless, I will say David definitely fits that bill and does give the addiction side of the world a bad name, like why so many people think that addicts are just inherently bad. And I would argue, I don't think it was the alcoholism that made David bad. I think David's just a bad person. And he uses his alcoholism throughout this story as literally an excuse. Like he blames everything on his alcoholism. We'll talk about that more later. So let's talk about David for a second. David was born sometime in June 1981. I could not find an exact date, but that means he was 33 years old. Amber was 30, he was 33 at the time of Amber's murder. There's not a lot out there about David's upbringing. He did say later in his trial that he had a fairly normal upbringing, but he started drinking at a very young age, and as a young teenager, he was already an alcoholic. But then it also escalated to meth. So not a great combo. And he had been getting in trouble since 1997 with the law, and he was only 16 at that point. So probably had been doing stuff up until that point where he hadn't gotten caught yet. His rap sheet includes many offenses for drinking and driving with a suspended license, traffic violations, things like that. But then after David was already in trouble for getting a DUI, they had one of those court-ordered breathalyzers put in his car. If you don't know what that is, you know what a breathalyzer is, to test the alcohol content in your blood. They can install those in your car so your car won't start unless you take the breathalyzer and pass it first. So he had one of those in his car, and he somehow, I don't know the details, but somehow bypassed it so that he could drive. So yeah, that is some pretty severe alcoholism. I don't think anybody can deny that. But David, that is, I don't think there's any excuse for drinking and driving, first of all. I think that's so selfish. I think you're putting others in danger. Even if you're an addict, that's no excuse for drinking and driving. But David also had violent tendencies. He was also showing a pattern of violence. He had gotten arrested for assault. He got arrested again for assault while he was on probation. And then in 2011, a police officer caught David attacking an older man outside of a 7-Eleven in Bremerton. And David was wielding a knife. So that time he got not only assault, but assault with a deadly weapon. So David's just a charmer, isn't he? And this isn't where the violence stops. That's not even getting into the DV, domestic violence of this case, which I will refer to as DV so I don't say it so many times that YouTube gets mad at me. But that's just the start of his life. That's before things got even worse. And mind you, it was reported that David was drinking upwards of a half a gallon of vodka a day with 18 beers a day. That is an exuberant amount of alcohol. I'm actually surprised that he didn't die from poisoning before all of this went down, because that's an insane amount of alcohol. Like I said, his addiction is very bad. There's no denying that. Okay, so that is Amber and David separately. And like I said, the juxtaposition of them both being alcoholics, but Amber not being violent, Amber being a kind person, Amber loving her kids, not being selfish, and then David, who has the exact same addiction, and he is a total dick. I don't know how else to describe it. Okay, so now we get to 2012, which is the start of Amber and David's relationship. And I'm really sorry, I digged, but I could not find how the two actually met. It doesn't matter too much. I know that it was around 2012, and like I said, Amber was estranged from their husband. They were completely separate, living in separate places, so they were free to date other people. And Amber was living with her oldest son, BC, in their apartment, and David was down on his luck, and she allowed David to live with them there. Their relationship was not good, as you can probably deduce on your own. According to Amber's son, family and friends, as well as neighbors, the two fought constantly. Almost on a nightly basis, they would drink and then fight. Now, again, I just want to be clear, yes, I I think Amber overall was a good person, but she was not perfect, right? It's still not great to fight in front of your kids and put them through that trauma. Just because she's passed away, I don't want to skirt around issues like that. I think overall she truly was a good person, which we see by the fact that she was never violent and she was trying to get her life back on track. Drunken fights with your boyfriend in front of your son, not great, I will say. And I'm sure she knew that, and that's why she was trying to change her life. Anyway, so everybody in Amber's life hated David. All of her sons, Paul hated him. All of Amber's family, all of her friends hated David, and who can blame them, right? So in the summer of 2012, the two of them got in a car wreck together. They were both drunk, but David was the one behind the wheel. When the police arrived and asked what happened, Amber tried to take the fall for David. She told the police that she was driving because she knew that David had a really extensive criminal history, and she knew that she would probably get a lesser punishment for it, and she wanted to take the fall for David so that he wouldn't get yet another thing on his record. The evidence at the scene showed very clearly that she was not driving. And I think this says a lot about Amber, but she came clean to police when they pressed her on it. She said, "I'm really sorry for lying." Like, she apologized to the police. She felt really bad, but she was just trying to protect. She really was in love with David. She was trying to protect him and trying to just take something off of his plate. I think it just says a lot about who Amber was as a person. I think she really believed in David. She put him up in her apartment because she wanted to help him turn his life around. And it's easy to say from the outside that, like, you can't change a person. But I think when you're in that situation, it's not as easy. So then, shortly after this accident happened, her and David disappeared together. They were fine. Amber's family finally filed a missing persons report, and the police did end up tracking the couple down, and they were both fine. They were just living on the streets and walking as a mode of transportation. Like, that's all they were doing. And then again, I know, like I said, like, also not a great look on Amber's part for leaving her children in order to, like, weirdly go on the run with David. But I think she was in an abusive relationship, and like you're going to see in a second, she does try to turn her life around. David, like I said, his violent stuff was going to come back around. He was abusive. This is a pattern with David. Amber's friend said that Amber told her that David had punched her in the face once so hard that she went unconscious. And on another occasion, her and David were swimming, and David held her head underwater as if he was attempting to drown her. Like I said, pattern. It's not like David just suddenly snapped and killed Amber. Like, he had been showing a pattern of volatile, violent behavior for years. As the relationship got worse and worse, Amber really did want to leave David. She was sick of him. She was sick of his drunk and volatile behavior. Even though she did love him, she knew that this was not good. You know, it wasn't a good relationship. She knew he was not a person that should be around her son. She kept allowing David to live in their apartment for longer than she should have because she felt sorry for him. She knew about his criminal record and what a bad state his life was in, and she just felt too guilty knowing that he would probably be homeless if she kicked him out. It was just a really hard situation to be in. Plus, he's abusive, so I'm sure he was manipulating the crap out of her. And I just feel so bad for Amber at this point because she really wants David to leave. So that whole car crash runaway incident happened in 2012. This is now 2014, and it was in mid-2014 where she really decided that she wanted to leave David. Remember how I said that she had that State Farm job? She was working on an associate's degree so that she could advance at the State Farm company. Like, she really was at this point trying to turn her life around. She knew she had to get rid of David somehow. She would get this good job, provide for her family, and never have to see David again, and they would all be safe. As Amber started doing better, David, I think, caught on to the fact that he was going to get kicked out soon, and he kind of knew the better Amber was doing, like the more clearly she was going to see their situation and know that David was a toxic, terrible person, he kind of knew that he was going to get kicked out soon. During this year in 2014, the timeline is a little murky, but Amber gets murdered in November 2014. Well, in March of 2014, David has another DV conviction on him because he punched another woman, not Amber, but another woman named Jessie, who was an ex-girlfriend. Like I said, the timeline's a little confusing. I think that this was when Amber and David broke up and he started dating this other woman shortly, but then him and Amber got back together and now this woman is an ex. And in March of 2014, he punched this woman in the face. He also threatened to kill this woman with a knife. He pled guilty to the charges and went back to prison for several months. But again, it's just the red flags are just so bright. They are flashing red flags. Like, this guy, how did people not see that he was capable of this? Maybe a lot of people did see that he was capable of this and they couldn't do anything about it. Anyway, so he went back to prison for a couple months, and then in June of 2014, he picks a fight with an acquaintance. He was the one that started the fight, but he lost the fight. David's a big dude. Like, he's pretty tall and muscular, and why he could overpower a lot of people, but I don't know who he picked to fight with, but they won. David ends up he just got out of prison for punching his ex-girlfriend. He picks a fight with this acquaintance, loses. He is so injured that he has to get flown to Harborview. If you don't know, Harborview is the Washington State, traumatic burn injury unit. That's the hospital where if you are in super duper duper bad shape and you need a helicopter to take you to the hospital, like, Harborview is where you go if you have a traumatic injury. So this dude fucked David up so bad that he had to go to Harborview. But David was the one that picked the fight. I'm not saying that that's I don't know what the right answer in that situation was. Maybe it was just self-defense for the other guy, but the police wanted to go press charges on this acquaintance, and of course David refused. I'm assuming, didn't want to be a snitch, but he would not press charges on this guy, or David just knew that it was his own damn fault that the fight happened in the first place. So just violent after violent behavior and incidents happen. Okay, so that was June 2014, jump to October 2014. Like I said, him and Amber are sort of back together, and he kind of gets the feeling that Amber is going to kick him out soon, that she really doesn't want him there anymore. And surprisingly, David getting kicked out of Amber's house is actually most likely not the motive for the murder. In October, because he kind of knew, he even posted on Facebook saying that he was going to need to find a new place to live soon. And he was even texting a friend about maybe crashing at their place for a while, knowing that Amber was going to kick him out. So he was trying to make arrangements. So all of this leads up to November 4th, 2014. It was November 3rd, 2014. November 4th was a Tuesday, so Monday night, November 3rd, the two got in a fight. They were at Amber's apartment. They start fighting. Nobody thinks anything of it. They were drinking. This was an almost nightly occurrence. During their fight, Amber told David to get out. She told him to leave. She was sick of his bullshit. We don't know exactly what happened because this is mostly according to BC, her son, who was in the house at this time. But David must have convinced her to let him stay. Amber goes into BC's room and asks hey, honey, can I have a sleeping bag from your closet? BC gives his mom the sleeping bag, assuming that it was for David so that he could sleep on the couch, assuming that Amber wasn't going to kick him out completely, but just that she did not want him sleeping next to her in her bed. The arguing continued. It continued to get more and more heated, and it sounded worse and worse. So BC actually comes out of his room to check on them. He said that he saw Amber and David in the living room together. The sleeping bag was on the couch, but they were just continuing to fight, but nobody seemed to be touching each other or anything. So BC kind of just like was like, okay, whatever, this is normal, goes back into his room and eventually goes to sleep. I do want to stress, like, I didn't forget about, like, poor BC. Like, this is terrible. BC has probably the worst. Other than Amber herself, BC is probably the biggest victim in this story. He shouldn't have to witness that. Like, children shouldn't have to witness fighting like that at all. And then what goes on to happen to BC is just even worse. So BC went to sleep, not knowing that him peeking out of his door to see his mom and David fighting was going to be the last time that he was ever going to see his mom alive. Again, we don't know specifically what the fight was about. I would assume it was about David getting his ass out of her apartment, but we do know that at about 1 a.m., the fight escalated and became physical, and a few minutes after 1 a.m., David overpowers Amber. David was on top of Amber and he started to strangle her with his hands, which, if you recall, that is what David was referring to at the beginning of this story when on 4chan he posts about how much harder it is to strangle somebody than it is in the movies, which, like, you know, duh. When his hands were not doing this quickly enough for David's liking, I don't even know how to word this, he gets a shoelace and continues to strangle her that way. And it is hotly debated whether it was actually the shoelace or his hands that killed her. But regardless, he used the shoelace after his hands and strangled Amber to death. She also had some blunt force trauma to the head. I assume that he was also like pounding her head against a wall or something, but I don't know for sure. He would later write on 4chan while he was posting the pictures, quote, "She fought so damn hard." I think that's why he was so surprised that it was so hard, that it wasn't like in the movies, because, like, yeah, a lot of people, if you don't know exactly what you're doing, which hopefully most people don't know how to strangle somebody perfectly, the person is going to fight. And I'm so proud of Amber. I hope she left something, some marks. I hope she hurt him physically in some way, because I'm glad that she fought. And it's but like I said, David's a huge, tall, muscular person, and like she also didn't really have a chance. Okay, it doesn't get better. It gets worse. It gets worse. David, as we know, took photos of her body from different angles. This was obviously very personal, and he was obviously trying to humiliate Amber, even though she was gone. Like, he still was obviously trying to humiliate her. I don't know why she was naked. I don't know if they were having sex before this happened. I don't know. I cannot tell you why in the photos she is naked, but she's naked, bare, on the bed, like her on her back, her legs are spread out, and David takes pictures of her like this. Absolutely just, okay, it gets worse. It gets worse. He does cover her with some blankets, and he puts a pillow over her face, which, as we know, I think that was kind of a sign of perhaps some... I don't want to say remorse, because his actions don't really show that much remorse, but I think he probably did have a moment of like, oh, I want to pretend like I didn't actually do this. Like, I can't believe I actually did this, because typically when you cover a body afterwards, or it happens a lot when you don't want to see the person die, so you like put a pillow over their face. Like, it's just a weird thing in true crime psychology. But I do think it shows some sort of level of like, oh my God, what did I do? Because he does cover her with blankets. But he also knows that her son is going to be the one that finds her. So I don't know if that's why he did it too. Because in the post, remember, he said, check the Port Orchard News in a few hours. Her son will be home from school and he will find her. So like, that showed foresight on David's part. And that's also why I wonder if he covered her body. Like, even though he knew that he was going to put that poor kid through the trauma of finding his mom dead, like, at least he didn't want to find him to find her like that. I don't know. It's weird. But it's not like he had compassion or anything like that, because then David takes a black Sharpie. Before he covered her in blankets, he draws on her body. Don't know exactly what was drawn on her body, but he writes on her driver's license the word dead across her driver's license, and he put that on the pillow that was over her face. Sorry. getting really mad. I need to calm down. Breathe. You're just telling the story. On the wall, there was a framed photo hanging on the wall, and David wrote with the black permanent marker, he wrote, "She killed me first." Over the blinds, which were down, he wrote "bad news" in big letters. Don't ask me what that's about because I have no idea. But after writing these things and setting her body up like this, David then fled the scene. Now, stick with me here. It's going to get a little confusing. We're going to jump back and forth from Amber's son and the timeline of him finding out that his mom is gone to what David does after he flees. So we're going to go back and forth from these two things happening at the same time. So at 6 a.m. on November 4th, 2014, 13-year-old BC gets out of bed and starts to get ready for school. BC's 13 years old now. He doesn't need his mom to wake him up for school, and he can now get ready and get out the door all on his own, which is nice for Amber because it would allow her to sleep in so she could sleep until she had to get up for work. Her bedroom door was closed, which was completely normal. He assumed that she was sleeping, so BC left for school. But soon after arriving at school, BC feels suddenly very, very sick. And he wasn't like puking and had a fever all of a sudden. Like, he didn't have the flu. He literally felt sick to his stomach because he felt like something was not right. Like, he just had a terrible feeling, and it was manifesting itself physically. BC texted his mom, and of course she does not reply. He calls his dad, Paul. Paul comes and picks him up from school because he's sick. This is about 11:30 a.m. in the morning when he picks up his son. He gets BC some juice for his stomach, and then he drops him back off at Amber's apartment. I mean, that's where BC's bedroom and stuff is. If he's sick and needs to go sleep it off, like, that's where he's going to go, right? So Paul just drops him off back at the apartment, says, "Okay, you have a good day. Let me know if you need anything." And he left. So BC goes into the apartment. His mom's door is still closed. He still assumes that she either left or that she is still sleeping for whatever reason. BC gets a snack. He eats something. He takes a shower, and then he takes a nap. And he sleeps for several hours. Makes sense. Like I said, he felt sick. It's a little bit after 3 p.m. at this point. He notices that his mom's door is still closed. He hasn't heard from her. And as he walks by her room, he notices a weird smell coming from under her door. Finally, that was the final straw to make BC decide that he needed to go check on his mom. So he opens the door and he goes inside. All he sees is a pile of blankets and a pillow. He tried to turn on the light, but the light switch wasn't working. He saw his mom's stuff littered throughout the room. She had dentures, so some of her dentures were on the floor. Her purse was empty on the floor with the stuff from her purse all strewn about on the floor, as well as some like coins, just random stuff like that. Like, obviously looked weird. But then he goes up to where he believes his mom is and sees her driver's license that's had the word "dead" scrawled across it. At this point, BC is worried about his mom, but he does assume, again, he knows that his mom has this alcohol problem, and he assumes that she just passed out from alcohol and was just still sleeping. So he gets into the bed with her and he tries to wake her up. She's typically a light sleeper, so when she doesn't wake up immediately, he doesn't look under the covers, thankfully. I'm sure he saw something, but he didn't know at this point if she was dead or alive, which I think for his own trauma is probably good that he didn't feel like he actually saw her just dead. But regardless, he left the room and texted his dad. All he texted Paul was, "Something's wrong with mom." Paul knew at that point that something must not have been right. So he rushes over. He is at that apartment within 10 minutes. He had another one of his sons with him. The kids wait outside of the room. Paul goes into Amber's bedroom and takes the pillow off her face to see her body. And it was very clear to Paul immediately that she was dead. As we said, BC was getting a smell coming from her room, like she was already starting to decompose. Paul hurried the kids out of the apartment. He calls 911 at 3:26 p.m. So that is how the family find out. So the family really found out at about 3:30 p.m. in the afternoon. So let's go back a little bit. Meanwhile, David texted his boss at 6:20 in the morning, telling him that he had done something bad and that he was going to be on the news in a few hours. So nice of David to think of his job and his boss and make sure that his boss knows that he wouldn't be coming into work that day. What a responsible guy. He then texted a friend a few hours later at around noon, so like almost 6 hours later, in fact, texted a friend and said that he really fucked up last night, and he told the friend that he was either going to be in jail or dead by the end of the day. Now, this is the part where it just seals the deal for me that David has no remorse, he's a terrible person, and he's only sorry that he got caught. At around 1 p.m. that afternoon, David drives to a pawn shop. In Amber's car, he stole her gold Ford Focus from the scene, and he got $125 for pawning a laptop. He then went to Albertsons to get a liter of vodka and orange juice, of course. He then ended up at Walmart around 2:30 p.m., where he bought the BB gun and the ammunition. Remember, in his 4chan post, he said that he wanted to die by cop, and he was buying the BB gun and ammunition to make it look like a real gun. A lot of those do look very much like real guns to scare the police into shooting him and killing him. So David's hanging out in the Walmart parking lot for a while. Like I said, it was 2:30 when he went in, and he posts the photos of Amber on 4chan at almost at like 5 minutes to 3 p.m. or something like that. It was pretty close to that. So Paul had all day to think about this. He kills somebody, and he decides to post pictures of it on the internet, where things are never ever truly erased. This is about 30 minutes before Paul would call 911 to report Amber dead. After that, he took Amber's car and drove to Portland. He went into a bar and he drank the rest of the night away. He was being really friendly. He was talking to the other patrons. He even left a nice big tip for the bartender. The police actually did recognize the gold Ford Focus in Portland. All of the police stations in the area, knowing David was on the run, did have their sights out for this car. The police in Portland spotted the car and they did try to get David. However, David was driving around when they spotted it, and so they started a high-speed chase. And the chase got so dangerous because David was weaving in and out of lanes and stuff like that so much that the police ended up having to call off the chase because it was like more dangerous to the people that were walking around Portland than it was to anything else. So they let him go for the time being. David continues to evade police until the next day, until November 5th. 2014. Police do find Amber's car. It was abandoned in the place where the chase ended. So when the chase was about called off, David gets out of the car and most likely used public transit to move around after that. And it wasn't until 8:45 p.m. on November 5th when David finally turned himself in. David was hiding in a wooded area. It was kind of like a homeless camp, and it was in this wooded area next to a transit center in Wilsonville, Oregon. David actually spotted a sheriff deputy that was patrolling that area, and David actually went up to the police car, and then the police said that he just saw a shadow come over his window. The police was like, "Hey, you need some help? Like, are you okay?" Didn't know who it was, and David said, "Yeah, I think there's a warrant out for me in Port Orchard." So David was, of course, immediately arrested. They had found his little camp where he was hiding in the wooded area. He was like sitting on a box spring, so, you know, not a mattress, but the thing that goes under a mattress, like it was just the box spring. And in the Sharpie, again, he's obsessed with black marker. He wrote on the box spring in big letters, Dave's last stand. And then it was found that he also left a note. David actually did attempt suicide, but he failed, I guess you could say. So he drank a shit ton in the woods, and then he took like 20 trazodone, which if you don't know, trazodone is a sleeping pill. It's a prescription strength sleeping pill. So he wrote this note and passed out, but then to his amazement, he woke up and the pills did not kill him, probably because his body had such a high tolerance for substances. So he just left the note and all that stuff in the little campy area and then went to go find the sheriff and was like, well, if I'm not dead, I might as well turn myself in. Okay, anyway, so the note said, I killed Amber Coplin. I strangled her with my hands, then a shoelace. I had no reason other than I was drunk and she pissed me off. Running from the cops was so fun. David was arrested, of course. We're going to talk about the trial a little bit, but I do want to mention motive. A real motive was not clear. I did read one source that said that David thought that Amber was seeing somebody else, which, like, duh, I hope she was, you know, like they weren't really together anymore and she was trying to separate from David and stuff, but I don't know if that's true. Like, I'm not positive that that's it. But then the other thing they found at the crime scene was medical records for Amber indicating that she had recently had an abortion. So it is also thought that perhaps that night Amber told David that she was pregnant with his kid, that they were pregnant, but that she had already chosen to go get an abortion, and that this possibly enraged David. So we don't know exactly. I mean, the fact that he wrote "she killed me first" makes it kind of seem like it was a he thought she was cheating situation, but who really knows? And it's hard to know because David's whole defense is that he doesn't remember anything. So David goes to trial because he does plead not guilty, but he's not pleading not guilty to the murder. He's pleading not guilty to first-degree murder. So his defense goes to trial. He pleads not guilty for the charge because he would like it lessened to second-degree murder or manslaughter. David's defense argued that his severe alcoholism, his injuries, like his previous head injuries, as well as his various mental illnesses, should be proof enough that David was incapable, basically, of premeditation. However, thankfully, the jury didn't buy it, and they did end up convicting David of first-degree premeditated murder of Amber Lynn Coplin. And the judge sentenced him to 82 years in prison. 82 years, so he would be like 100 something if he ever got out. So it's very unlikely that David will ever get out. He keeps trying to appeal it. He keeps trying to do all this, you know, all the legal loopholes, and he keeps getting rejected, thankfully. I couldn't find any information about parole. I don't believe he was granted any parole period, like after serving a certain amount of time. I believe he has to serve 82 years before he gets any parole, so I don't think he's getting out of prison. So why the jury decided it was premeditation was for a lot of reasons. I mean, first of all, David's criminal history, like he had a violent past. He was being charged for other things as well at the same time of Amber's murder. A big point of contention with the defense and prosecution was that some experts said, by examining Amber's body, that her actual cause of death was strangulation by hand. But then another coroner or expert said that it was actually the shoelace that killed her. This is important because to the jury, the defense was trying to argue that if Amber's cause of death was hands, then that means that it was not premeditated because you couldn't prove that he had an intent to actually kill her or that he had thought this through at all. But if it was the shoelace, then that definitely proves it was premeditated because David had minutes with his hands on Amber to decide to stop doing this, to decide that, hey, maybe I shouldn't kill this person. Like, this isn't working. Maybe I should not kill her. Maybe I have another option here. But instead, after that wasn't working, he was like, You're not dying. Okay, well, I need to get something stronger then. I need to get a shoelace. So he had time to stop what he was doing and chose not to. I don't personally think it matters, but obviously I'm not an expert and I'm not a juror, so don't listen to me. But the note says I strangled her with my hands and then with a shoelace. And to me, that proves that he was strangling her with his hands and then went to go get a shoelace because the hands were not working. So that just screams premeditation, at least in my very unexpert opinion. Then he left the body, and like he said on 4chan, he knew that Amber's son was going to be the one to find her, and he did it anyway. Yes, he did get charges for that as well. But for me, that like proves that he knew what he was doing, and that was like foresight that he had planned out, like he knew how she was going to be found. You know what I mean? And then lastly, of course, the pictures posted on 4chan. He also got charges for that because you can't just post somebody's body. It caused great harm to her family and friends by posting those pictures. I just don't buy the fact hours after this happened, he was remorseful and not only put her body in that compromising position in order to take photos, but then hours later had hours and hours to think about this entire thing and made the conscious decision to post them online and essentially brag about it and further humiliate Amber by posting those compromising photos online for people to see. Absolutely not. David's a monster. You cannot claim that any of this was an accident or that he didn't think this through or that he didn't plan on killing Amber. Even if he didn't plan on killing her until a few moments before, he did have a few moments of premeditation, and that's first-degree murder. So lastly, I found this podcast. They haven't posted in a while, so I'm really hoping they're like defunct now and that they decided like maybe this wasn't a great idea for a podcast. But there's a podcast I found on YouTube that interviews convicted killers in jail or in prison, and they like let them, like they interview them and like let them have their side of the story, basically. I really do not agree with this podcast. I do not like it, but they interviewed David Calix, so I did listen to some of it. The reason I don't agree with a podcast like that is because literally who cares what the killers think? Like literally who cares? Their opinion, their thoughts, their defense, they're in prison. It doesn't matter. You killed somebody. You don't get a voice anymore. Like you don't get to go on and get a platform. And that just makes me really sick. I don't like that at all. But I had to listen to some of it, and I'll probably add a little bit so you know what I mean when I talk about this. But it's just bizarre how normal David sounds. Like he sounds, it might be because he's sober in prison because he can't get alcohol in prison, but like he sounds so friendly and just like a very, very normal guy. You would never know that he did these kind of things. So I'm just going to play like a small clip of the way he talks.
I definitely believe it. They, in certain prisons out here, they won't let you have magazines with life-size guns or knives in them because you can cut the picture out and tape it to something that kind of closely resembles that shape, and then all of a sudden it looks real. My dad, I stay in contact with my dad on a regular basis. We're closer now than I think we ever were before any of this happened, which is weird, but it's also really cool. My youngest brother won't have anything to do with me. My middle brother is dead. He actually died 2 years after I got arrested.
But in this interview and at the trial, his defense, like all of these years, he always has just claimed that he doesn't remember any of this. He was blacked out drunk, and he like briefly remembers being on top of Amber and with his hands around her, and like kind of vaguely remembers bits and pieces, but that this wasn't his fault because he just blacked out. And sorry, I took a life. Sorry, I took a mom away from her 5 young children who now are left without a mom. And in the interview, he blames the whole thing on alcohol. And even one of the interviewees says that they agree that an 82-year sentence was excessive for this crime.
I don't remember Amber coming home. I don't remember us getting into any kind of an argument. I have little bits and pieces of like flashes of memories that don't make any sense because they feel like they're out of sequence with other stuff. I remember like a flash of having my hands around her neck, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I don't remember the act of actually strangling anybody. So it's weird for me to look back on something like that. It's weird for me to see that. The blackouts are a crazy thing, man, because I've heard from a lot of people that, you know, memories are supposed to trickle back over time and this and that, and nothing's ever changed. A good portion of that night is just completely blank to me. I believe that I got the short end of the stick, and the only reason I say that is not because, you know, I was there during trial. You know, I saw all the evidence presented, and I can honestly sit here and say that, yes, it sure looked like it was me that did this crime, you know?
Yeah.
And I can understand doing time for that. 100%. I can understand doing, you know, a large portion of years for that. But 82 for something that I can't even remember doing seems excessive.
I can agree with that.
Did they actually try to like play that off, like maybe saying you were faking the blackouts, or?
Yeah, of course they did. Yeah, I mean that was the whole prosecution.
I think it's respectable of him because a lot of people would be trying to fight it, like, oh fuck that, I shouldn't serve anything, I don't remember. But he's actually like, no, hey, there was solid evidence. Like, not saying I didn't do it. I just don't think I should serve this much time. Like, I agree with that. I mean, I think that's a good argument.
It's like, stop sympathizing with murderers, literally. So the reason, like, the reason there's no excuse, just even if he was blacked out and doesn't remember, even if that was true, first of all, hours later he was sober and still he was drinking, but he was not blacked out drunk. Hours later, he still decided to post photos of her body on the internet. And notice how Amber was also an alcoholic. I'm sure she had blacked out a few times in her life. Did she ever kill anybody? No. Did she ever hurt anybody? No. Did she ever hurt a fly? How, like, there's so many people that get blacked out drunk all the time and they do not have a violent bone in their body and they would not hurt a fly. So that is not an excuse for me. David was this kind of person to the core. He is rotten to the core, and he used alcohol just as an excuse because I think the alcohol just allowed his body to do what he's always really truly wanted to do inside. Because if alcohol was really to blame for this, then we would have a lot more murders in the world, because every time people got drunk, they would start killing people. And that's just not how it works. He is responsible for this. I don't care what anybody says. Alcohol is not an excuse for this. So then a few years after he's in prison, I'm not going to harp too much on this, but just to make an example out of what I'm saying, he beats up another inmate again, and he got charged with attempted murder of another inmate while he was in prison. He's not drinking in prison. There's no alcohol in prison. Well, there might be, like, you know, toilet jailhouse alcohol, but there's no way there's enough for him to get as drunk as he was getting. And he attempted murder on another inmate while he's in prison. David, tell me again how it's all the alcohol's fault and that you're not really a violent person. Tell me again how remorseful you are. Excuses, 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 and lies after lies after lies. This is a consistent pattern of severe violence. Okay, that's all I have to say. Okay, we are going to end it there. I just want to one more time reiterate that other than the couple afflictions that she had, which, like, who doesn't have them, she was known as such an amazing person. She seemed really fun to be around. She was really sweet. Like, even David, who was an asshole, like, she tried to take the fall for him at one point so he wouldn't get in trouble. She loved those kids more than anything in the entire world, and she would have done anything for them, and she was trying to do anything for him. She was trying to get her life back on track. She was trying to get David out of the picture. She was trying so hard to be the best mom that she could be, and she didn't get the chance. And I just keep thinking about those 5 boys that have to grow up without their mom. It's just not fair. It's just not fair. And that's why when I think about Amber, I have absolutely zero sympathy for David, and I hope he rots in prison where he belongs. Yeah, I think we're going to end it there, though, because I'm mad. I'm just mad thinking about David. I've had to relive this several times now from researching as well as talking about this, and now I'm going to go relive it in editing. And so, yeah, I'm just mad that people like this exist and act like it's not their fault. So, okay. Thank you guys so much for watching. Please like the video just to support the channel if you'd like. And I will see you all in the next one. Don't forget our sponsor, Factor. Use my link down below for a discount, and I will see you all in the next one. Thank you so much to all of our patrons on the screen right now. Special shout out to our top tiers: Colin Holmes, The Deck of Cards, Michelle Valdovinos, Little Kittle Cat, Mitchell Schaefer Meyer, Momo Neon, Marita 144, Elderly Hipster, Rebecca Jackson, Queen Amon, Cobblecon Anime and Gaming Convention, Sarah the Crazy Fish Lady, Maxie, Ellison Luna, Tiny Mighty Bookworm, A Bunny Apparently, Leon Vanek, I Am in Your Walls, Habromania, Cyberdog Investigations LLC, Vicky Cat, Amy B, Take Urch, Dead Without the E, Chara, MH Dave, Ami, Lindsay R, It's Tara, obviously, Shayna R, El Magnificoco, Laura Winter, Lilith, Dana, Ashes, Gosh Zilla, Geo, Arya Anomaly, Ghosty Girl, Mel Miller, Jessica Cook, Mark Fagundes, Mike, Yankee, and Stinky Pete.